We're going to talk about something called NEAT. We're going to talk about all sorts of aspects of fat loss that are governed by your nervous system. The nervous system and the role of the brain and other neurons has been vastly overlooked in the discussion about losing fat. And I find this fascinating. I wish more people knew about it, which is why I'm telling you about it today. There's some great stuff out there, and there's some really terrible information out there, and there's a lot of controversy. Remember, your nervous system, which includes your brain and your spinal cord, and all the connections that they make with the organs of the body, governs everything. It's the on switch and the off switch for your immune system. It's the on switch and the off switch, it turns out, also for fat burning. So your nervous system is the master controller of this process. And it plays a strong role in the calories out, the calories burned component. Your body fat of various kinds, and there are several kinds of body fat, are actually innervated by neurons. Neurons connect to your body fat and can change the probability that that body fat will be burned or not. So let's talk about how to activate the nervous system in ways that it promotes more liberation, movement, mobilization of fat, and more oxidation of fat. In 2015, and again in 2017, there have been studies that have explored this using some modern metabolic tracking. And indeed, simply moving a lot, being a fidgeter, bouncing your knee, standing up and pacing, what's called NEAT, N-E-A-T, which is non-exercise activity thermogenesis, NEAT, led to considerable amounts of fat loss and weight loss. There's clearly a tool to export from this, which is that you can increase the amount of calories burned without having to go on additional long runs. If you're really interested in burning calories and you already exercise, you want to burn more, or you don't have the opportunity to exercise, or you're averse to exercise for whatever reason, what's the protocol? Fidget. This process of taking a walk each morning isn't about exercise. It's not about burning calories. It's not about any of that. When we generate our own forward motion, forward ambulation, visual images pass by us on our eyes, so-called optic flow. Forward ambulation, walking or biking or running, and generating optic flow in particular, has this incredible property of lowering activity in the amygdala and thereby reducing levels of anxiety. Getting into a mode of forward ambulation and especially experiencing visual flow has a powerful effect on the nervous system. Now it should make sense why shivering is one of the strongest stimuli that one can incorporate to stimulate fat loss. Cold causes the release of adrenaline from your adrenals, and it causes the release of epinephrine from these neurons that connect to fat. And there are several ways that you can use shivering, you can leverage shivering, and you can leverage cold to accelerate fat loss. But you have to do it correctly. And most of the people that are using cold and, frankly, suggesting cold as a means to increase metabolism fat loss are suggesting the exact wrong protocol. If you get into cold water or an ice bath or a cold day, and you try and remain calm and resist shivering, you actually short circuit this mechanism for increasing brown fat thermogenesis. It is shivering itself that causes the brown fat to increase your burning, your burn rate, and your metabolism. So let's talk about movement and the more traditional kinds of movement, aka exercise. Your entire life, waking or asleep, is broken up into these 90-minute ultradian cycles. The brain is going through these 90-minute so-called ultradian cycles throughout the entire day and night. Every 90 minutes, we shift over from being very alert to being less alert and then back to alert again. There will be kind of peaks and valleys within that, but that 90 minutes is about what the brain can handle in terms of a dedicated effort for high degree of focus, especially if you're somebody who tends to have that mid-morning sleepiness or mid-morning crash. That's the mentality that I've embedded in myself, that there's nothing more important than what I'm doing in that 90-minute block. And that's what works for me. The brain loves that state, but it's very hard for many of us to access. Digging through all the studies on this, we're finally starting to arrive at a consensus of when is best to do exercise and what types of exercise to do if your goal is fat loss. So rather than think about weight training versus cardiovascular exercise, I think the most simple way, the most fluid way to have this conversation about exercise and fat loss is in terms of three general types of training: high intensity interval training, sprint interval training, or moderate intensity continuous training. So we can think about high, medium, and low intensity exercise at about or after 90 minutes of moderate intensity exercise. There's a switchover point. You will burn far less fat from the 90-minute point onward than you would if you had gone into the training fasted. Fasting increases levels of adrenaline to create this heightened state of alertness, yet calm brain state. In its optimal range, adrenaline really provides a heightened sense of focus and the ability to encode, meaning bring in, and retain, remember information. And I suggest people do whatever they need to in order to self-regulate that activity. Now, 90 minutes of moderate intensity exercise is a lot. There are also studies that point to the fact that you don't have to wait to 90 minutes in order to get this enhanced fat burning effect. The studies I was able to find, and that looked to me like quality peer-reviewed studies with no company bias or no product bias of any kind, pointed to the fact that if one does high-intensity training, then the switchover point in which you can burn more fat if you go into that fasted comes earlier. You have the capacity for what are called phase advances and phase delays. The period that we call sleep and the period we call wakefulness are tethered to one another. What we do in the waking state determines when we fall asleep, how quickly we fall asleep, whether or not we stay asleep, and how we feel when we wake up the next day. In sleep, we are only in relation to things that are happening within our brain and body. Outside sensory experience, in most cases, can't really impact us. And yet sleep is this tremendously important period of life because it resets our ability to be focused, alert, and emotionally stable in the wakeful period. Most people are not familiar with what it is to sleep really, really well on a consistent basis. You will be amazed at the tremendous number of positive effects that can come from that. If you're falling asleep during the day and you're sleepy, like you're falling asleep, that's a good sign of insomnia. It means you're not sleeping enough at night. If you're fatigued during the day, but you're not falling asleep, so you're just exhausted, but you're not finding yourself falling asleep in meetings and in conversation, then chances are you're fatiguing your system through something else. There are a few other things that turn out to be strong parameters for success in this domain. Positive anticipation about the next day events actually is a powerful metric for creating quality. Quality sleep, even if the sleep is very reduced. Belief effects just thinking can impact the effects of things like exercise on weight loss. These are just incredible results. So this is remarkable, and it speaks to the power of the nervous system and the power of belief in governing aspects of our body and our physiology that one would otherwise think were outside our conscious control. How many calories you ingest versus how many calories you burn is the fundamental and most important formula in this business of fat loss and weight management in general. There's simply no way around the fact that if you ingest far more calories than you burn, you're likely to gain weight. But the calories burned portion is strongly influenced by a number of things that you can control